Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Bottom Turtle Podcast. I'm Dr. Shannon Ray, and we have come to the end of another year. I feel like I've tried to record this intro to this episode several times, and my mind keeps converging on kind of wanting to recap my 2023. And 2023 has been a difficult year. Sometime between releasing the many worlds interpretation of Buddhism and the ultimate abstraction, my mom passed away. So that was part of the reason why why I didn't upload too often around that time. And I've been avoiding talking about it on the podcast because, it's something very deeply personal. I don't think that I still haven't really processed it. Like, it's hard to come to terms with. And I don't know. Right now, the more I try to avoid talking about it, the more it seems like I need to talk about it. But yeah, as anyone who listens to this podcast will know, I love my mom a great deal. And in these last few years, in the last 7 or 8 years after getting my PhD and moving on from that part of my life, I've really come to appreciate my parents more over time. And you can hear my appreciation in episodes like Spirits and Waveforms when I'm talking about valuing what was handed to you. Like, you can remember that. I think it's within the first 10 minutes of that episode. And I criticized an Instagram post talking about how everything that was given to you, your identity, is fake. And I commented on how I thought that was an unappreciative perspective. And, going into adulthood, getting married, having children really makes you appreciate what your parents have done for you. And it really makes you understand how much of who you are is the spirit of your parents. And I remember after my son was born, thinking about the idea of cultivating joy and happiness within him, being the proper parent so that he gets a good model of joy and happiness and love, and making sure to pass that down to him. And when I was thinking about that, I started imagining that in the future, when he's my age, he's going to have a spirit and he's going to behave and think in a certain way. And maybe at some point when he is raising his own kids, he'll be reflecting on how I raised him. And then he'll come to understand, like I did, that the thing that says I am Shannon is the spirit that was given to me by my parents. And so when you listen to this show, you know how I think in terms of archetypes and macro states, and how the spirit of a scientist, the spirit of a physicist, the spirit of a comedian, these spirits do not belong to individuals who identify with those spirits. Those spirits are eternal possibilities of the universe that are plucked from the set of all configurations the universe could be in, and then embedded in individuals. And so those spirits, they existed before you existed. And for my parents, they were embodied within my parents. And so when they imbued those spirits into me based on how they raised me, when they imbued that spirit into me, it is that spirit creating itself. That spirit of happiness, that spirit of resilience, that spirit of Christ, the spirits that are passed on to you, they are creating themselves. And so when I think about my mom's spirit and her passing, I think about a phrase that I came up with. And that phrase is, I existed before I existed, and that is why I exist. I existed before I existed, and that is why I exist. And what existed before Shannon, the person speaking into this phone, was the spirits, the eternal spirits that were embodied by my parents, by my mother, that were then passed down to me. And just as I can imagine I am a physicist and identify with that spirit, I identify with the spirits of my parents, the spirit of my mother. And I know that my spirit and my mother's spirit are inseparable. I am my mother. And so in that sense, she is certainly not gone. So I hope I can later on do my mother's story and my mother's spirit justice, to give her a proper monument, a proper appreciation, a proper send-off. And that's one reason why I haven't really talked about it until now, is because I'm, as I tend to do, I try to think, can I find the perfect moment to share this? I'm like always trying to imagine some point in the future where it'll be the perfect right time. But yeah, so that's how my 2023 is ending, reflecting on my mom. And also I found out, a couple weeks ago, that a friend of mine that I met on Instagram, passed away in a jet ski accident. And I met this person, his name is Victor Rodriguez. And I met this person on Instagram, on the Lex Friedman, Instagram page. Lex Friedman was holding some, he has, every once in a while, he posts some application for anyone who wants to talk to him. You can send an application like talk to Lex Friedman or whatever. And we both filled that out. And I remember he made a comment in the comment section of the post saying something like, saying who he was. I am a PhD student at Carnegie Mellon who trains Muay Thai, who's getting his PhD in studying perceptions, the idea of perception, biases in perception. That was one of his big things that he was interested in, was examining people's biases, the type of biases that exist, how they develop, how to get past biases. And he has this Instagram page called Decision Dimensions. And so when I saw him make that post, I was like, shoot, I want to talk to you. Like, forget Lex Friedman. I want to talk to you. And so we exchanged emails and became good friends, have hour-long conversations. He'd share his ideas with me. I would share my ideas with him. He was really encouraging. His goal after getting his PhD was to create a show that was designed, he wanted to create a show that kind of examined these ideas, have guests on to discuss these ideas that he was passionate about, kind of like, what I do with the Bottom Turtle podcast. And as a martial artist, he wasn't a huge UFC fan, but he really liked One Championship. And so he was like, hey, you should watch One Championship. And I started watching it, to bond with him, whenever fights were on, I'd be like, hey, you watching the fights? And we would talk about the fights. And so he passed on a Tuesday, but the previous Friday, One Championship had an event, and there was some crazy Muay Thai fights going on. Like, there was some really amazing fights, and I was texting him like, hey, are you watching these? And one of the fighters was an American guy, and Victor had trained with quite a few famous Muay Thai practitioners. And he knew this guy, like he met him at least. And I remember him telling me about meeting him and telling about some of the techniques he was using in the fight. And so that was Friday. And then the following Tuesday, I think the following week, I get a message on Facebook from his mother, telling me to call her. And when I did, she told me that he had passed away. She said he passed away on the Tuesday. So I talked to him on Friday and he passed on Tuesday. And the guy was just an amazing person, man. Really intelligent, really open-hearted. You know, he's just a really good person. Like this is a blow to humanity, I think, losing this guy. He had, I think, a 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a wife that he's leaving behind. So, you know, 2023 has not been the best year. I'm not gonna lie. And one of the things that I wanted to do with this podcast when I started going solo, when Oyani left, you may remember back in its context all the way down, I was pointing out that I need to open up more. I need to allow myself to speak in a less filtered way. And when I say less filtered, I don't mean to be a jerk or something like that. It's just to speak more passionately, to allow the way that I feel to be expressed, to talk about the things that I want to talk about sincerely, you know? And so this episode, ending the year, is more, touches more on a controversial topic. And that topic is this whole trans stuff that's going on. It's the what I call the gender ideology, which I separate from trans. I don't think that all trans people think the same way. I don't think that they all agree with what's going on. But they are being used, I think, as an avatar to push a certain set of ideas. And my issue with these ideas have nothing to do with bigotry or hatred towards trans people. When I was in high school, I went to high school with a trans person. It was a trans man, a trans boy, the girl who identified as a boy. And I spent absolutely no energy being angry at this person for being trans. Like I honestly, it wasn't very important to me. You know, I'm a high school boy trying to navigate that space, especially a nerdy kid who gets picked on a lot. So, you know, this trans person wasn't really wasn't really a big issue for me. And on top of that, this particular trans person, I'm pretty sure was cooler than me, like more popular. I mean, I was pretty bottom of the barrel, which is very surprising. And they had a strong sense of like dignity and self. I don't know, like they stood up for themselves. They weren't a timid person that didn't feel, it was just a person. And that is the amount of energy with which I care about any individual trans person in terms of like negative emotions. Like I don't care, honestly. Not a big deal to me. The issue I have comes with gender ideology, I think, as a whole. And what I most don't like is that the ideas being proposed don't seem to have any logical consistency associated with them. And so if you listen to this show, you'll know my views on objective truth and objective reality and where objective truth comes from. And in the episodes, it's context all the way down and it's algebra all the way down. I make the case that objective truth comes from these algebraic structures, or at the very least, it comes from consistent relationship between symbols. So you need some sort of logically sound language that can produce meaning. And the meaning it produces has to be reliable or consistent, meaning that you don't want words to map to anything, because a word that maps to anything maps to nothing. And so the idea of having something that is logically sound that can produce consistent meaning means that it can be used for communication. Because if the meaning is consistent over time, then when I go to use the word to communicate to somebody, I can predict how it will program them. I know that if I go up to someone and I say, "How are you doing today?" versus "Go F yourself," that will program them differently. It's not like I'll be shocked or surprised if I walk up to someone and say, "Go F yourself," and then they got angry or tried to hit me or something. I wouldn't be surprised at all because I know how that word will program them, because the meaning of those words, of those symbols, are independent of how I feel about them, and they're independent of how they feel about them. They produce images. And like I said, you can go back to the episode, it's Algebra All the Way Down, if you want to get a more detailed explanation of this. And also you can go to the episode, it's Context All the Way Down, if you want to get a deeper explanation into this. But one of the bases for a language to have meaning, to have information, is the ability for predictability. You have to be able to predict how these words will program people. Because even while I'm talking to the phone right now, I am using a particular set of symbols and words with the expectation that when they are received, they are understood to some degree in the way I intend them to be understood. Otherwise, what would be the point? And so this idea of predictability and consistency is necessary for communication. And some of the ideas in gender ideology, like a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman, doesn't really have any consistent predictive capacity. And in the podcast, like in this episode, in the main recording, I make a statement saying that it objectively has no information. And I might have went too hard in the paint on that claim. And and I give an example in the episode where I'm like, imagine someone offers you a blind date with a woman. And if you are using the definition that a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman, you can't make any predictions on what you expect to see about that person when you get there. You can't make the prediction that they'll have a penis or they won't have a penis. You can't make a prediction that they'll have breasts or not. Like you can't really make any prediction about what you'll see when you get there. And in fact, for a lot of people within the gender ideology space, the idea that you could predict what you'll see based off of that would be offensive, because you are being exclusive by saying that people who have penises can't be women. And so, like with someone using that as a definition, you can't use it to make predictions because the meaning of the word depends on any individual. And this is something that we also mentioned in the podcast quite a bit. And I think the episode, Speak Your Truth, and again, in It's Algebra All the Way Down, we talk about what would a world look like if everyone had their own meaning of symbols, of what words meant. Book meant different to each different person. Fire meant something different to each person. If that's the case, then when I go to use that word, I have no idea where it's going to map someone's mind in the space of concepts. I have no idea how it's going to program them. And that is just a realm of chaos. And it's a realm where no one has a shared spirit or a shared language. And so a necessary requirement for communication is symbols that have meaning independent of any individual's feelings. And that's where the objectivity comes from. And this is part of my issue with this ideology. It has nothing to do with hatred for anyone. It has to do with, this does not seem like a logically sound structure that contains information. And I think that the effect that it has in our ability to communicate is a cost. Just like in the episode, I think, Art Meaning Computational Resource, we talk about how you can think of everything in terms of cost all the way down. There is a significant cost to taking words like boy and girl, man and women, which are foundational to how we communicate and organize our society. Like, these are not minor words. Like, if you look at the set of all words used in any language, I imagine boy, girl, man, woman show up a lot. It's probably one of the most common words. It's not a minor word. It's a big deal to change it. And so when people say something like, oh, you not agreeing that a trans man is an actual man or a trans woman is an actual woman, you know, it doesn't cost anything to you to believe that. It doesn't cost anything to you to think that. And I can't help but feeling that that's just either a disingenuous argument or an argument based on delusion or an argument based off of ignorance because they don't know where meaning comes from. They don't know that we need shared concepts that have reliable, consistent meaning. And so this is the basis of my disagreement. It's more of a logical basis. And when I said before that this thing had no objective meaning, and I used the example of the blind date, I started thinking, going, okay, maybe I went too hard in the paint. Does it have any predictive capacity? And I had to start thinking through, like, to what extent does this have predictive capacity? And I thought, well, I think the most information it can provide is something like, you can expect that the person will identify with the pronouns he and him if they say they're a man, given the definition that a man is anyone who identifies as a man or a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman. But I don't even think that that's guaranteed. And so if it has any predictive power, it is significantly reduced amount of predictive power from the original definitions of man and women, which are based on physical characteristics that anyone can identify. And this is the second complaint that I have about this ideology that I present in this episode, is that the way they are changing the meaning of these words make it to where less people can participate in conversations using those words. Because you take something as simple as men have penises and women have vaginas, or you take something as simple as babies come out of this one, babies don't come out of this one, which anyone can verify. It creates a common word, a common concept that anyone can participate in because it doesn't take a genius to verify whether someone's a man or a woman. And so it's a very inclusive term because it includes the most people to participate in the conversation. Whereas the definitions they're giving now are very convoluted, esoteric, highfalutin, and hard to comprehend, and I suspect are constructed from a logically unsound language that actually doesn't produce meaning consistently. I suspect that this language is not valid. So that's another objection I have to all of this. And then the third objection that I present in this episode is the idea of where this information comes from. And as I've discussed in, I think, All as One, information emerges from a relationship between a self and an other, a binary, like an up and a down. One points in one direction, the other points in another direction. And things like being able to get pregnant is a mutually exclusive trait that only women can do. And so to say that men can get pregnant, it's like, okay, given the shared meaning that everyone has of understanding that people have of that word, this seems to be like a logical contradiction. And then when someone presents you with something like that, you have to ask them, okay, well, explain yourself. What do you mean? Can you explain what you mean by that? Build me a world. Build me a logically sound structure that produces meaning so that I can comprehend what you're saying. And every conversation I've had with anyone and anything I've seen of someone trying to explain, it seems to me like they don't know what they're doing. They don't know where information comes from. It seems like they're more concerned with allowing people who are biologically male to be able to say that they're a woman, and people who are biologically female to be able to say that they're a man. And that seems to be the only thing they care about. And they're willing to sacrifice our ability to communicate, and they're willing to sacrifice logically sound structures just for that purpose alone. And it's like, that's a huge cost to solve a problem that I don't think is that big of a problem. And this is my main objection to it. And so the episode itself is broken up into two parts. The first part of the episode is more focused on agreement. So I think I'm going to call the episode To Agree or To Not Agree. Because the first part of the episode is trying to emphasize the importance of agreement when building a language. We all have to agree on the set of propositions, the set of axioms that we're using to construct a world. And so once we all agree on a concept and what it means, then we can use that concept to communicate with. And so we conjure objectivity into existence through agreement. And this is another reason why I don't agree with this ideology, because communication requires shared words whose meaning are independent of any individual's feelings. That's what you need. Mutual information is what we call it. You need mutual information for successful communications. And so because of that, any word doesn't belong to any individual. It belongs on a network. Like everyone, it's shared information. It's shared. And so words like man and woman and boy or girl, these are foundational concepts. And for someone to claim that they're going to subvert the meaning of these words based off their own feelings, I think there's an extreme amount of narcissism in that. There's an extreme amount of narcissism in thinking that you can dominate other people with your feelings and how you relate to a word. And traditionally, if someone wants to subvert the meaning of a word or change a language, they have to produce an argument. They have to produce art. They have to convince people. Just because you feel strongly about something doesn't mean that you get to control the words that bind us together in a shared reality, a shared simulation, a shared spirit, a shared language, a shared mind. And I can't see how this isn't anything more than people with something like a God complex. You're allowed to express how you feel and you're allowed to try to change people's minds, but just because you feel strongly about something doesn't mean that anyone else has to agree. And for me, myself, the idea of saying that a man can get pregnant, it's like I'm lying to myself every single time I say it because I don't believe it. In fact, I remember I was having a conversation with someone the other day who is more sympathetic to these ideas, and by that I mean agrees with them. And they were talking about some nurse, I don't know if it was a TikTok or what it was, but there was some nurse who was telling a group of people or telling some other nurses that about the hazards or how detrimental it is to hold your urine for a long time because it increases the chances of prostate cancer. And someone spoke up and said, "Oh, okay, but what about women?" And the nurse responded, "Women can get cancer too." And the person was like, "Yeah, but women don't have prostates." like that's why I was saying that. And so it's something about demonstrating the ignorance of the nurse who was making the original claim. And so the person who was telling the story, they were telling it because they were like, women don't have prostates, obviously. And then I was like, "Oh, but some women do." I was being cheeky. "Oh, but some women do." And they were like, "Oh, yes. And it's like, no, I don't think that you really think that. I don't think that you really think that. I think that claiming that a woman can have a prostate or a man can get pregnant is not sincere. And for me, it's not sincere. It's like you're coming to me and you're asking me to lie to myself. And then you're saying that that's not a big deal and it's not a cost and that what you're asking for is really minor. But anyone who says that acquiescing to the idea that men can get pregnant is minor, like I said, I can't imagine that being made out of honesty. Because once you understand that our ability to have a shared language, shared concepts, a shared spirit, a shared model of reality so that we can cooperate and communicate with each other requires shared understanding of words. And so trying to overturn an important word to make a small group of people feel better is not a minor ask. There's a huge cost to that. And we can observe that cost not only in our breakdown of communication, but also our breakdown of how we structure society with men competing against women in sports, like Leah Thomas competing against women in swimming and going from being like 400th or 44th or whatever it was, as a male competitor and then becoming number one as a female competitor. Men being sent to women's prisons, children being given hormone blockers, without sufficient evidence to know the long-term effects and surgeries, like at the age of 15 or 16, that mastectomies and things like this has real-world repercussions. It's not a minor ask. And there does exist arguments disagreeing with it that have nothing to do with bigotry, hatred, or homophobia or transphobia. And that's kind of what I want to present, from the perspective of an information theorist. I disagree on logical grounds. I disagree on the grounds of how communication works. Shared information to be able to communicate. That's what this episode is about. So, I hope everyone had a happy 2023. I appreciate everybody who has stuck with it and has listened to this podcast from beginning to now. Like if you started on the very first episode of the first season and you've been listening all the way through until now, I am immensely appreciative of that. And I hope that you're getting value out of this. I hope that it's giving you a new way to look at reality, a clearer way to look at reality. And that's one of the feedbacks that I've gotten a lot from people. I usually get 2 feedbacks pretty consistently. The first is, I never thought of it that way. A lot of times people will say, I never thought of it that way. For example, the telling people a secret and the nomentation without representation. When I tell people that, it's obvious. Programming people, yes. But when I explain it the way I explain it, they're like, I never thought of it that way. Another thing that I get is that when I explain things, things become clearer. So there might be an idea or something that is understood, but when they hear me explain it, it's like you've taken something and you've shined it up, you've cleaned it. And so I'm hoping that people who listen to this are getting that out of it. I also hope that it produces more gratitude in people. People are more appreciative and loving and patient with others and themselves. I'm hoping that it does that as well. And I hope that this episode is not received. Well, I mean, I can't control how it will be received. But I hope if you're someone who's been listening to this podcast and you vehemently disagree with me about the trans stuff, like everything I've just said, if you've been listening to this for a long time, then, just give me some benefit of the doubt and just push through and listen to it and see whether or not you think that there's any validity in my arguments. And if you find something flawed, then great. Send me an email and tell me. I'd love to hear it and to correct my code so that's more in line with reality. So if you want to show support for the podcast, things that I would really appreciate are going to whatever format you're listening to it on and leaving a review and rating it. It doesn't cost you anything, but it would be greatly appreciated. I'll greatly appreciate it. It'll mean a lot to me, and it doesn't cost you anything. And I put a lot of effort into creating this content. So if you want to give something back that doesn't cost you anything, just rating the podcast, writing a review, would help a lot. And if you want to go extra and really show your appreciation and support, just recommend it to somebody. If you find that if you listen to this episode and at some point you find it particularly compelling or interesting, and if at any point in time you're captivated by it, find someone who you think could appreciate it and share it with them. I would greatly appreciate that. Yeah. So, with that, I hope everyone has a good 2024. I hope everyone had a good 2023. I appreciate you guys immensely, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Peace. I was just thinking about whether or not there exists an objective measure of how seriously we should take something. Is there some sort of objective measure that determines whether or not this is important? And it's kind of funny because the whole point is that the objective measure is what we all agree on. That's the crazy part about it. It's really that simple. Objective measures come from agreement. So if I were to say, I wonder if there's an objective measure for determining whether or not this is something that's a concern. So in other words, if someone brings up a topic or an idea and they say that this is something we should be concerned about, is there an objective measure to say, no, we don't have to be concerned about that? And I was prompted to think about this because I was watching UFC, I think 295, and a commercial came on where it had two black parents with their black daughter, and she's like a teenager, and I think they're talking about getting her insurance or something like that. And it's supposed to be like this loving thing where it's like, a family. They're just using a family to sell insurance or whatever product they're selling. And I looked at it, and the fact that the family was black was absolutely uninteresting. Like, it was absolutely not significant or important. And the reason why is like, because you see it all the time. Like, it's really, really, really common. Something that you see over and over and over again. And so when I think about the idea of representation and how people keep pushing it, so it's like the most important thing we need to think about is representation. Let's put all of our energy into this. And it's like seeing a black family on TV selling insurance is just not a rare event. It's not like it's 1940 or 1950 or something like that. And every single commercial before that was a white family selling insurance. The idea of using a black family just didn't even come across anyone's mind. And then one day they just have a thing on there where it's the first time there's a black family selling insurance to everybody. And so because it's a rare event, there's a lot of surprise, which is the definition of information. The amount of information you get during a communication is the amount of surprise. And the amount of surprise is related to the probability of that event happening. Because if the event happens over and over again, if you see a sequence happen over and over and over again, seeing the beginning of the sequence and then seeing the end of the sequence, it's not going to be surprising because you've seen it. Like, oh, it started like this and it ended like this. It started like this and it ended like this. The interaction, the sequence. That thing is really predictable. And after you see it 1,000 times with only one beginning and one end and one middle, and that's all that happens, it's like, oh, I know what's going to happen. I can predict the future. Once the beginning starts, I can predict exactly what's going to happen from beginning to end. And so if you can do that, then that means you have full information. There's no uncertainty. So the idea is that if an event occurs that is really rare, so you see the same sequence happen over and over and over and over again, and then on the millionth time you see it, like the millionth and first time, something different happened at the end, you'd be like, what the fuck? You would be shocked. You would be absolutely shocked that something different happened. And you'd get a lot of surprise. That's the definition of information. And so when I was talking about this idea of an objective measure of whether or not something's important, when I'm looking at this commercial and I just see a black family selling insurance, and it's like, because the representation thing worked. Like representation, like it was pushed at some point in time, things diversified, there's representation. And it's like, okay, how many times does the same event have to occur before I'm like, okay, this is not interesting. This is not important. And this is part of the objective measure. I'm trying to tie our measure to how information works. So when I proposed at the beginning of this little thing, what if there's an objective measure for when you can tell when something's important or not? It's like I'm suggesting this as a measure. Because I know in some circumstances this would not be sufficient. This would not be a sufficient measure because something happening over and over and over again doesn't necessarily mean that it's not important. It may mean that action needs to be taken to stop it. So I understand that it's not a necessarily thing, but then that other side of the coin that's being presented, like this other argument, like, oh, what if it's this circumstance? It's like, okay, well, in that circumstance, we'd use a different measure. Every single time you introduce more information, then we'll go, okay, what's the optimal answer for adding this in? But I'm making a general argument about the idea of like diversity, equity, inclusion, and all this stuff that's being pushed so hard. It's like, I think that it's in the first category that I mentioned, which is like the black people selling insurance and how that's not an amazing accomplishment. It's not an amazing accomplishment. It's like you're not doing anything. This is just regular life. It's like you're not saving the world with this. It's this. I think that there's a degree to which it's like, okay, this is not some of the thing we should be most concerned about, guys. And I think the proportion of the amount of energy and effort and thought that goes into this versus the problem it's trying to solve is just way out of whack. I don't think that it garners this much attention at all. Like at all. And so this is just my feelings about it. It's not objective in the sense that I'm saying this has to be true, but it becomes objective when people start agreeing with me. You see, yes, I agree. Let's use this measure. And then once you use that measure, you're in the world in which that measure is being used instead of some other measure, like the instance where it's like, oh, well, just because something happens over and over again doesn't mean it's not important. It could mean something needs to be stopped. It's like, well, in that case, then my measure I proposed before would not be the objective measure we'd want to use in that circumstance. You know what I mean? Okay, we switch it. But the whole point is that once you agree that we're going to use this measure for a thought, then you're in the world in which that measure is the measure being used. And then now that we're all in agreement, we all have a shared concept. You see? We all have a shared concept, which is this measure that's being used. Okay, let's use this measure. So once you have this agreement under the understood as a shared measure, then objectivity arises from that agreement. Because now we all just agree that this word means this. And it's just an assertion. But we all just agree on this assertion. But the thing is that if you make one assertion, then you make a second assertion, they have to agree with each other. And each one of your assertions is like an axiom, but they have to interact in a way that's logically sound so they can create a world with consequences, with logically provable consequences. And these provability of the consequences based off of whether or not you can predict the future with it, which is the idea of having information. It's all about predicting the future, trying to reduce the uncertainty to know that if I do this, then that will happen. And if we agree on a set of axioms, a set of objective truth, a set of objective measures, a set of objective perspective, objective language, like you see, even if you're understanding or comprehending this, I'm making a set of noises and we all just agree that the words I'm saying mean what they say. And so because we all agree, then when I make these noises, because I'm just making noises, these are just noises, just weird noises. And if you don't speak English, they don't even make any sense. It's just nonsense. And so that set of nonsense noises are just something we all agreed on. This means this. And that's where language comes from. We just agree that these mouth movements and these guttural or whatever is coming out of my throat based off of how my physical body is constructed and my vocal cords work and all. It's just fucking insane when you think about it. And so every single guttural noise that's coming out of my mouth only makes sense to people who speak English, because all those people know how to make meaning in English. And so the English is the shared language, is shared information, such that when I use a symbol, I can predict with certainty how that symbol will program you. And if I can predict with certainty how the symbol will program you, then I will use those symbols to communicate with you. So if I say, hand me 5 pennies, I'm not going to expect you to punch me in the face. I'm not going to expect you to do a backflip. I'm not going to expect you to read a book. I'm going to expect you to pick up 5 coins and hand them to me. Or respond with something like, I can't hand you the 5 coins. No, I don't want to give you the 5 coins. Something associated with, like, I got to predict that these words are going to make something happen that's correlated to the words I'm using. You see what I'm saying? What I'm trying to say is that the objective truth comes from minds coming together and agreeing that these words mean this symbol means that. And then we also know that it's possible to make up things that just don't logically follow. If I jump off a roof and land on concrete on my head, I will not bounce up and down in like a basketball. I won't just like, I won't not die. So you have to create, like the world you create has to be logically consistent. Like it has to be some sort of a logically consistent world that has a causal structure. Because once we all agree on the symbols, and then we agree on how to create meaning, which is the syntax with those symbols, once we know how to make the syntax, then we can create these causal structures, which are the sequence of noises and movements and gestures that are made to create a piece of art that is communicated to someone else so that it actually programs them and shares their spirit with them. We are these things with a shared spirit. That's what having a common language is to have a shared spirit, a shared conceptualization based off of symbols and words and causal structures that are independent of any individual. And that's how the laws of physics work. That's why we treat the physical as being so important, because the causal structure, like if I drop a glass, if I smash a wine glass on the ground, it's going to shatter. Like, if you don't believe me, just go do it. Take a hard piece of ground, take a wine glass, and throw it as hard as you can at your foot. And I seriously hope no one will do that, because they already can predict what will happen if they do it. No, I don't need to do that. I know what will happen. I'm not stupid, is what I'd expect people to say. Yes, exactly. So we all agree that that's how gravity or force, momentum, impulse, change in momentum, like we all agree that's how it works. And then we also agree that there's a set of equations, mathematical equations, Newton's laws, that when you write them down and you set up a system, you can predict what's going to happen. You take a ball, you put it on an incline, you know its density, you know its radius, you can compute exactly how long it'll take to get to the bottom. And then you can actually get a recorder, record it, and watch it happen exactly the way, and then predict it up to like 4.8732896 seconds, depending on the precision of your measurement devices. And this is just what we do in physics. And so once you understand that I live in the world of mathematics, where the idea of throwing something on the ground and having it hit with force or having an impulse or having a change in momentum, which results in a force, like, to know that I have spent 30,000 hours, 40,000 hours, however long it's been, I don't even know at this point, just studying those symbols, what they mean and how they work, and verifying them with experiments, and then teaching other people how to verify them, and then going into labs and watching people. It's like, for me, the world in my head, the world of mathematics, the world of physics is as objectively real as smashing a wine glass on the ground. And I know it for a fact because I've written things like the adiabatic isometric mapping algorithm. I wrote the code. Where do you think every symbol came from? It all came from math. If you go to my Instagram at playapapapa, or on the bottom turtle, and you see these images of these colorful surfaces evolving from spheres to like these beams and things, once you understand that every single thing that caused that is a math algorithm that I wrote, once you understand that animation is the result of a causal structure that I created using mathematics, that is like thousands and thousands and thousands of lines of computer code that I have written in MATLAB and translated every black bit of that MATLAB code and rewrote all of it in C. So I have a C code version of it and a MATLAB code version of it. You see what I'm saying? Because I have the spirit of mathematics and physics, I have the conceptual structure that captures the essence of how reality works. Or at the very least, I have access to a set of concepts that most people wouldn't have access to. You simply cannot see the world the way I see it. You don't have the same language, which means you don't have the same spirit, which means you don't have the same sight, which means you can't program the universe with the power of that sight, of that awareness, of that consciousness. You can't bring your art into existence to be a creator. And my whole point is that when you understand that language comes from agreement, relationships, and that we all come together and agree, we conjure the objectivity into existence. Because every single conceptual state corresponds to some sort of physical configuration. It's the nomentation without representation principle. I can tell someone a secret, they can physically stand up, walk into another room, tell someone that secret, which means that I had to encode it in them like a memory card. Which means different states of mind, different states of being correspond to different physical configurations. And so whenever we have a shared word or shared concept, the image or the ideas or the thoughts it directs you toward should be predictable. It should be the same. If I say, hand me the book, the next time it shouldn't mean hand me the rattlesnake. It shouldn't be random. should be consistent. And so the direction you're pointed in whenever you communicate points you in some sort of direction that's aligned with the person communicating with you. It's taking your awareness from in the space of configurations and in the space of concepts, in the space of configuration, the space of concepts. It's taking your vector from pointing in one direction. You're aligning it with the person you're communicating with. You're changing your direction of sight, your direction of awareness. And so that has to correspond to a physical change in your physical system. And so we know that there's some degree to which we're all aligning up together. You see, this has to be an objective fact. Because when I use a word, if I say duck and you duck, then the concept has been transferred. The spirit has been transferred. So the concept, which is a conceptual thing, had to have been transferred physically. And so to some degree to which your physical configuration in the space of concepts has aligned in the same direction as me because you understood what I was saying, that had to create a conceptualization, and then you ducked. So it's an objective fact that through shared language and shared communication, that we can verify that there is some degree of alignment. It has to be, otherwise you wouldn't duck. So there has to be some degree to which I know that these words are going to program you in a specific way. And so when I'm trying to communicate them to you, I need you to listen. And I need you to listen in this way specifically. Remember, I'm a mathematician. And so I read these mathematical texts where they say stuff like, let M be a space-time manifold with metric G. Like, I literally wrote a sentence like that. Let M be a space-time manifold with metric G. And so in mathematics, when we talk, we're just like, let this be this, let this be that, let this be this. And there's no disagreement. It's just like, okay, this will be this symbol mean that, this symbol mean that. I'm not arguing with you. It's like, okay, all right, continue. I just accept it. I agree. Okay, this psi with an arrow over it means parameters of symmetry. It means Euler angles. And this is, again, something that's literally comes out of my recent paper on quantum ignorance. And in that, I have a vector, psi, which represents the parameters of a symmetry. And you can think of that in terms of Euler transformations in R3, and like the psi would be the Euler angles. And so in my paper, I'm just like, this psi with a vector on it means that it is the parameters of the symmetry. And so whenever anyone asks me what it is, they see D psi. When I'm taking a Taylor expansion, they know that the D psi is the fact that I am taking a Taylor expansion with respect to the parameters of the symmetry transformations. And so if anyone's reading my paper, no one gets to argue with me about what that means. The only way they get to argue with what that means is if what I say doesn't make any sense. What are you talking about, parameters of symmetry? That's not a real thing. Like, anyone who's not a mathematician, I could be saying complete nonsense right now. You wouldn't know. Parameters of the symmetry, Euler angles, or Euler transformation. This could just all be gibberish nonsense that I'm making up out of my asshole. None of it could be real. And if you don't speak the language, you have no clue whether or not what I'm saying is real. You see how this works? It's like you guys don't live in this world. You have no spirit here. And then I'm like a guy who just comes around like, hey guys, I'm a scientist, I'm a physicist, I'm a mathematician, and I've noticed that I live in this world of objective concepts and mathematics and that are tied to the causal structure of how reality works, and that I've been studying it for all these years, and that I've been studying for so long that I just automatically turn everything into math whenever I think, and I just intuitively think in terms of symmetry groups and Lie algebras and entropy and quantum physics, because that's what I do every single day of my life. And it's like, once you understand that, it's like, okay, why should I pay attention to you? It's like, well, I can give you sight that you are like, you want to come to know my spirit. You want to come and know my spirit. I will bring you to places you couldn't even have imagined. You couldn't even begin to imagine the places I've been, the things I've seen. You have no clue.
You have no fucking clue. You can't verify whether or not my Euler symmetry thing is true, but you can verify it because you can just Google it now. So you can just Google Euler transformations, and you can just Google Euler angles, and you can verify it. You see, this is just how insane the world is now. We can create an objective agreement about what reality is. But my whole point is that you can't see in this world. But someone who can see in this world will hear these words I'm saying about Euler angles and symmetry transformations and cathedral with arrows over them, and they won't be confused at all. It will make perfect sense to them. It will program them differently than it programs you objectively. As objectively, you don't get to argue with what I'm saying. Because we all understand how understanding works. If I'm talking to someone who only speaks Chinese, they're not going to understand what the fuck I'm saying right now. It's an objective fact. You don't get to disagree. You don't get to disagree. And see, this is how I'm trying to build the conceptual space. I'm trying to build the entirety of the conceptual space this way. Just using common things that we can all agree that is true. To build a shared language. And I'm proposing to use math because it creates high precision, objective languages in which you can write very complicated things with these symbols. But you need to spend your time coming into relationship with the symbols so that you can know the syntax, so you can create meaning, so that you can see, so that you can have the spirit, the shared spirit. Yeah, but bringing it back to the idea of when you get to disagree. So here's when you get to disagree. You get to disagree when it sounds like I'm making up bullshit. Like if someone comes to you and is just like, okay, we all agree the moon's made of cheese, right? No, get the fuck out of here. No, we don't agree to that. Will you please stop? No, we don't agree. You guys all agree we can walk through walls, right? No, maybe, but we haven't verified that. There's no reason to think that. So as far as I'm concerned, unless you have a device, or you know of a device that's been created, or you know of some theory or an idea that could possibly make that a possibility, like, okay, maybe I will agree with you, but okay, what say you? Now it's like, okay, now try to convince me. Build a world for me. See if I want to live in it. Build a world for me. And it's like, okay, so now here's the point, is that when you're listening to me, it's like, I'm building a world for you. Does it sound like I'm just making stuff up? Does it sound like I'm just making stuff up? I know you don't think that. Because the examples I use are things like telling someone a secret. You can get up and tell someone else a secret. You can gossip. So because you can do that, we all know that telling a secret is like encoding something in someone like a memory card. You don't get to disagree. You don't get to disagree that one of the similarities, or one of the symmetries between minds, or between minds and computer algorithms, is that we are physical subsystems of the universe that can be placed in many different configurations based off of what data we take in and how we process data. That is an objective fact. And you can verify it because I can program you with words. And those words get stored in your physical system as memory. And that memory holds the spirit of the words that's been sent, which may go into your mind and program you without your knowledge. What are you unaware of? Why are we so afraid of being deceived? What is deceit? We don't get to disagree. We don't get to disagree whether or not deceit exists. We all know what deceit is. We may not know what it is exactly, but it's not pointing to cantaloupe. Yeah. So we don't get to disagree whether or not deceit exists, because the word directs your mind in a specific direction in the space of concepts, in the space of configurations. Like, we can communicate. We have words, we have language, which means that there is objectivity. So the existence of objectivity can be verified by the fact that when I say these words to you, we know they can program you, and they program you in a direction consistent with the causal structure that is determined by the syntax of the language used to communicate it. And this is what I'm trying to say. It's like everything I'm saying is objectively true because I'm giving you I'm tying everything I'm saying to how the universe works. You don't get to disagree. Jump off 20-story building, fall on your head, concrete, die. You don't get to disagree with whether or not that's true. And if you do want to disagree, then what say you? Build a world for me. What theory, what idea, what reason do you have for saying that? And if the world you're building is full of things that I know for a fact are not true, and logical inconsistencies and contradictions and symbols with no consistent correlated structure such that you can't reliably predict what you'll do when you put them in a specific sequence, you can't predict the future with it. And so information meaning comes from the agreement to have shared symbols, shared spirit, shared language, shared causal structure, shared reality. It's the simulation we're creating. We're creating a simulation of reality together. We create the simulation of reality in the way a human does. When I look at a chair, I see it the way a human does, not the way an octopus would see it. And you do too. Shared language, shared spirit, shared physical configurations. You don't get to disagree with anything I'm saying. And if you do, then why? It's like, do you not want to listen to what I'm saying? Is because if you disagree, then we can't continue. Which means I can't continue to try to communicate what I want to communicate to you. So that's why I was saying at the beginning of this, listen to me the way mathematicians listen to each other when you're reading something from a textbook or something. When I say, let M be a space-time manifold with metric G, just be like, okay. You can disagree if you want, but why? And then when you understand that the stuff I'm saying is all just obvious. Of course it's obvious. Why would I not use things that aren't within the commons? That's where all the shared spirit is. The causal structure of reality. Physics. You can make up whatever ideas of what you think how things work, but there's a limit to it. And you'll be faced with the truth of hard reality. It doesn't give a fuck what delusion you've created in your head. It'll keep you in line, just like in that Of Montreal song. Bitches, bitches, physics makes us all its bitches. I guess it would be nice to give my heart to a god, but which one do I choose? All the church are filled with losers, psycho or confused. I just want to, I can't know the rest of the song, but it's like when I'm listening to that song and I hear the phrase bitches, bitches, physics makes us all its bitches. We all know exactly what that means. Physics makes us all its bitches. You can try to make up whatever version of reality you want. And at the end of the day, we don't know whether or not we are living in a simulation, and we don't know if we're brains in a vat. But at the very least, we are aware of a very sophisticated causal structure that we're in. That much we can all agree on. Because it took you time to listen to this, which means that you had to listen to the sequence of symbols such that you have your mind aligned with mine, which will point you to a specific direction in the space of concepts, in the space of configurations, in the space of spirits, the spirit world, the space of metaphors, the space of vectors, the space of feelings, the space of values, the space of entropy, the space of emptiness, the space of information, the space of Buddhism, the space of Christianity. They're all perspectives, they're all lenses, they're all ways of seeing reality. And once you can see with them, then you have their awareness, you have their sight. And with their sight, you can program reality in a way that's consistent with that awareness, with that consciousness, to be aligned with that artist, with that spirit. So when you listen to me, I'm trying to align you in a direction, in the space of concepts and space of configurations that directs you at what I call gauge gates, which are paths to higher states of being. And I'm trying to explain to you how to align yourself in this direction. It's like, look what I can see. And the thing is I use ideas and concepts that can be verified by anyone, so you don't get to disagree. Do you disagree that the adiabatic isometric mapping algorithm exists and works? Well, if you look under the hood of that thing, and you'll know that that entire thing was written by me. If you actually, I will share the code with anyone who asks for it. If anyone listens to this episode and wants a copy of that code, I will send it to you right now. And when you look under the hood of that code and you see all of the math programmed, and you know that every last thing in there came from my spirit, came from how I see, came from my sight, you will understand that I can program the universe with that spirit, and I can write the adiabatic isometric mapping algorithm, which is something that most people on the planet cannot do and will never do. Because I have the spirit of a mathematician. I have the spirit of a theoretical physicist. Don't you get it? It's not a normal spirit to meet. A quantum physicist? This is why you should listen to me. This is why you should stop what you're doing and listen to the entire podcast. I swear, if what I'm saying doesn't make sense to you, then it's because there's something along the way that is just stopping you from just listening. Because when you look under the hood of that code, it's like I look back at it. When I made it, I didn't know what I was doing. But then I looked back at it with hindsight, with the extra data from living, from the extra experience, the extra knowledge, the extra languages I've learned. And then I look back at what I did and I just can't believe it's insane. Because I didn't make up any of those symbols. I just learned how to use them. And the people, the gods of my world, the creators of these symbols, my colleagues, the people I know, you have no idea how much these people just blow my mind every day. They're so fucking smart. And it's just the precision of mathematics means that you are just carrying a high resolution language. You can just see deeper. You can just see clearer. You can take reality and break it up into smaller pixels, higher resolution, more detail. More detail. Because when you go to my Instagram, PlayAPaPaPa, and you go to it, and you go down to the spheres that start off blue and then evolve with these different colors, and you understand that the colors represent extrinsic curvature, which is computed by an equation, and you understand that every bit of that evolution was done by Ricci flow, the beginning was done by Ricci flow, the mathematical is a diffusion equation for curvature. And then you hear this idea, diffusion equation of curvature, and it sounds like made up nonsense. Like technobabble, Star Trek technobabble nonsense. Ricci flow, diffusion equation of curvature, uniform embeddings, Newton's methods, initial guesses, optimization, half-edge data structures, simplicial lattices, circumcentric dual lattices. Once you start to understand that everything I'm saying is true, nothing I just said does not exist. You can Google every single word of what I just said, and it will pull up a Wikipedia page with some math on it. And you'll be like, I had no idea any of this stuff existed. I know it exists. And the degree to which I am familiar with it is proof evidenced by my creating the adiabatic isometric mapping algorithm code. Now you know for a fact that I am who I say I am. It's an objective fact. You don't get to disagree with what I'm saying. I am a quantum physicist. I am a theoretical physicist. I have the sight of that spirit. And the words that I use program people differently. They program spirits differently based off of what shared language we have. It's like being a theoretical physics is like living in a world where everyone just speaks Chinese and you only speak English. Not only that, but it'd be like a world where everyone only speaks Chinese, but you never even heard of Chinese. You were even unaware that any such thing ever existed. And then you didn't even know what it does. What happens when you can program the universe? Well, at the very least, I can program computers. We all agree computers exist. You don't get to disagree. You don't get to disagree that we have a device that we can intricately program different configurations on. There's a direct correlation between what you put on your phone and what's stored on it. You don't get to disagree that phones work. You don't get to disagree that computers work. You don't get to disagree. And if you do want to disagree, then tell me why. It has to be for a good reason. Something that has to do with what I'm talking about. Something on topic. I don't want a non sequitur. Oh, because I want to focus on whether or not bananas are ripe on Tuesday. Nah, I don't give a fuck about that. Oh, well, it's because because there's no absolute truth. There's always a degree to which, yeah, I agree. There's always entropy. Yeah, okay. But I'm not pointing at Clifford the big red dog right now. You see what I'm saying? I'm pointing over here. So why is it that you want to disagree? Because when you do that, you are just disrupting the flow of communication. Yes, I agree. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to focus on what I'm saying. You don't have to share my spirit. You don't have to listen. Absolutely. I'm not telling anyone that they have to do anything. I'm just saying if you want to listen, then will you just agree? Because the symbols I'm using are just obvious. I'm not making stuff up. You can verify it yourself. You can Google the adiabatic isometric mapping algorithm. You can contact me and I'll send you the code tomorrow. You see what I'm saying? It's like sometimes, I have to communicate it this way because I need to get your attention. And I need to get your attention in a way that makes you stop and think to yourself, oh, I should be paying attention. The way you do when a parent is telling you something. I'm trying to give you pure truth over here without any logical inconsistencies or delusions or lies. And I'm trying to give it to you from the perspective of a scientist, of a theoretical physicist, of a quantum physicist, of a general relativist, as a computer programmer, as the spirit of algebra, as the spirit of quantum mechanics, the spirit of mathematics, the spirit of physics, the spirit of an African American, the spirit of a male, the spirit of a human. I need you to know who I am so that you know how you should be paying attention, how you should interact with me. Who are you talking to? And why the fuck should I pay? Okay, actually. Okay, yeah, this is actually pretty interesting what he's saying. At the very least, I have to capture your imagination. I have to capture your attention so that you want to listen to me. Like, the degree to which I'm asking you, the degree to which I'm asking you is to just listen, to not disagree, is the same degree to which Steven Spielberg asks you to experience his art. When you go into a movie, are you just sitting there going, nah, I don't want this to be horror. No, they should have made a comedy. Well, why the fuck did you go see it then? You see what I'm saying? Like, you don't pick up a manga by Junji Ito and then get upset when it's not happy or when someone dies in it or something. It's like, well, you agreed to interact with his art and this is what he's putting out. So I need you to think of it as like watching a movie. Open your heart to my words long enough so they can program you, and quit trying to disagree with the things I'm saying. The choice of symbols. Just agree with the symbols in the same way as let M be a spacetime manifold with metric G. And then if what I'm saying makes no sense, or if I've gotten something wrong, or something is factually incorrect, then be like, hey, wait a minute though. What you just said, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Now I can update my code, update my language, and then hopefully from this interaction, you get something out of it, and you get something that helps you be a better person and helps you help others, and we all help each other and keep society running. Not try to be narcissists and try to demand that just because you feel one way about a word, that's how it has to be, that everyone else has to agree with how that word should be used. You guys know what I'm talking about. It's like, and so this is the context right here. And I don't know if I want to get into it now because I don't know. I guess maybe I can get into it now. I just kind of want to go back to watching the UFC, but it comes down to this whole idea with this trans stuff. And I've mentioned this to people a million times, but the ideas being proposed are about as insane as someone coming up to you and saying that the moon is made of cheese. The stuff they're saying is just objectively it's just objectively has no information. It's just objectively has no meaning. And the example I want to give is the idea of what is a woman. And if anyone tells you that a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman, then it's like, okay, you're allowed to say that, but that you're allowed to say it in the same way that you're allowed to say that the moon is made of cheese. It's not a proper conceptual structure. And you know that because the thing about the idea that a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman is that it has no predictive capacity. You can't predict the future with it. So if I were to come up to you tomorrow and say, hey, there's this woman that I know, you want to go on a blind date with her? With that definition of a woman as anyone who identifies as a woman, you absolutely have no idea what you're going to see when you get there. You can't predict the future at all about what you're expected to see. Maybe the degree to which you can predict the future is that you'd think that you'd see a human, but why is that a limit? You have no clue. And so the thing is that, like I was saying at the very beginning of all of this, what is information? Well, gaining information is quantified by the amount of surprise. So that means that if you are not surprised by an outcome, it's because you could have already predicted it. And you could have predicted it because you had the information already. You already knew what was going to happen. That's why you can predict the future. And so whether or not you have information depends on whether or not you can predict the future. And if someone says that a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman, then I can't use that information to make a guess at all about what I expect to see. Will they have breasts? Will they not have breasts? Will they have a penis? Will they not have a penis? Will they menstruate? Will they not menstruate? Is it going to be a man or a woman? Because if you're using the word woman, woman gets its meaning in contrast to man. This is another reason why this structure doesn't make any sense. It's because meaning comes from having a reference to something else, a relationship, a binary, an up and a down. It's like man is up and woman is down. And it's a binary that you create to make meaning so that you can point in one direction or another direction. It's a vector. You're either pointing in this direction, you're pointing in that direction. But when you start blurring all the distinguishing characteristics that make one direction mean one direction, the other direction mean the other direction, when you start saying men can get pregnant, it's like, well, wait a minute, no, that's a mutually exclusive trait that points in this direction, which is opposite to the direction you're pointing in. You see, you're trying. It's like once you start messing around with these symbols no longer have any meaning. Like, if you don't have any sort of distinguishing characteristics, something you can compare and contrast, some reference, so that you can say I'm over here versus I'm over there, then you can't create meaning. And that's why in Buddhism, you're trying to get out of the binary. You're trying to remove them. And so it's like the relationship is where the meaning comes from. And woman is defined in contrast to man, and man is defined in contrast to woman, based off of physical characteristics. And the physical characteristics is a good thing, because it doesn't take a genius to understand what a woman is when you just say it's like people with breasts and who have vaginas and can have babies. Any idiot can understand that. And then men are the ones that have penises and testicles and don't menstruate. You do not have to be a rocket scientist to understand that. It's a very, very good metric to make a concept that is easy for anyone to verify. It's a very good physical marker, or marker of the physical state of reality, that is very common. It's a common structure. It's not highfalutin. It's not confusing. It's very simple. Just like I've always said, if someone does 30 backflips in a row, it's obvious that they've done something amazing. But when I'm trying to communicate what I've done in my mind in the conceptual space as a physicist and a mathematician, it's not obvious. And so in those worlds, you guys can't see that I'm doing anything amazing. Like, you don't, because they're not the commons. They're not obvious, right? And everyone has expertise. Everyone has their language. I'm not tooting my own horn. Like, everyone has expertise, their own language. There's so much stuff I'm not aware of. But the point is that when you use like these really physical, simple markers, they include the most number of people who can participate in the conversation, is what I'm saying. It allows for almost everyone down to the lowest IQ to the highest IQ to have a common concept. That's the reason why it's important. And it's a common concept based off of something that any buffoon or any intelligent person or anyone can verify. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand it. It's simple. Babies come out of this one. Babies don't come out of this one. It's that simple. And so it's inclusive. And I think this new way of doing things is actually less inclusive. I mean, even when I've read some of the like Bell Hooks book, Feminism is for Everyone, one of the things she complains about is how feminism started getting up its own butthole and became a highfalutin academic jargon that no regular person could understand. Like, she says this as a complaint in her book about feminism, like one of her criticisms. And so it's like, we know that making things too complicated alienates people. It alienates the common person. And so it's like you're taking the concept of man and woman from something that's simple, that allows everyone to participate and have a shared concept and language about something that's really important. You're taking that and you're transforming it into this highfalutin, college-educated, trying to transcend binaries. You know what I mean? Like, you are, and that's why it's like so confusing, all of it. Like, this is like some sort of elitist push to force people to not be able to just agree on simple things. And their justification for doing it just does not seem worth the cost. And the concepts that they've created, I don't even think that they've thought them through. I don't think that they have the sight of, they don't know how information theory works and where meaning comes from and algebraic structures and Lie groups and symmetries. They don't understand any of that. And so they create these definitions like a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman. It's like, look, if you're creating definitions like that, you have absolutely no business tinkering with these ideas. You just don't even know where meaning comes from. Like that, and this is my main opposition to it. It's just like, you're proposing a world to me, and I'm like, okay, propose it to me. It's like, I didn't get to this from yesterday. Like, I've had so many interactions with people, and every time I ask them to explain their ideas, they don't make any sense, and they fall on concepts like a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman, or saying things like that Berkeley professor who was testifying in Congress said that denying that men can have babies is like violence against trans people. And I am not exaggerating at all. And you can Google it. You can verify what I'm saying. The conversation, like, what was the name of the congressman who was talking to her? But look up Berkeley law professor, men can get pregnant, Congress, or something like that. I Google some sort of sequence of those words. And look at that video. And look at this woman saying not believing men can get pregnant is denying the existence of trans people and causing them harm and stuff like that. And it's just like, whoa. It's like you're presenting ideas to me that when I look at them using the lens of information theory, using the lens of mathematics, using everything that I understand and know, I'm trying to open myself up to listen to a world, an idea, a concept. But what everything you present suggests to me that you don't know what you're doing. And the stuff you're saying, like, woman is anyone who identifies as a woman, like, that is just not a proper construction. That just has no meaning. It has no meaning. Objectively, it has no meaning. It has no information. Because why? Information gained is the amount of surprise. Which means that if I'm not surprised by what happens, then I already had full information. So information is associated by your ability to predict the future. Surprise is associated with predictability. This is just like the fact that I'm recording this into a phone and sending it out and it's being communicated. Where do you think these ideas come from so that things work like this? Information theory in engineering, of course, and a bunch of other things, and all the solid state stuff and all the stuff you use. There's a bunch of stuff, but conceptually, like one of the conceptual foundations is information theory, which is the mathematical theory of communication. And so what I'm trying to tell you is that it's like, I don't think you guys understand communication to the depth needed to propose the things you're proposing, because you just proposed a concept that has no meaning or has no information in it. And you are adamant that anyone who disagrees with you is like committing violence or something. It's like, this is really weird. It's a really weird thing to do. It would be like going around and telling people the moon is made of cheese and then getting really, really mad when people don't agree, and then like start accusing them of stuff where they don't agree. When I tell them the moon's made of cheese, like, you've just made something that's just not true. It's just a logically unsound structure. Like, it doesn't have any information in it. I'm sorry. You don't get to disagree, though, that it has no meaning, because I'm an information theorist. Theory of communication made by mathematical theory of communication made by Claude Shannon, 1948. Information theory, surprise, quantified by the log of the probability, negative log of the probability, gives you the amount of surprise, which is the expected information gained. So information has to be associated to predicting the future, because if I can predict the future with complete certainty every time, then that means I had full information, which means I didn't learn anything. So if you say men can be women, then I can't use that information to predict anything about the future associated with the concept of woman, because you've taken all the concepts and you've blurred them all together to where the distinguishing concepts that created a binary between man and woman, which is the division based off of physical characteristics that anyone can verify, thus maximizing the amount of people who can participate in ideas associated with man and woman, because anyone can verify the physical characteristics that are as obvious as throwing a wine glass on the ground and having it break. This is how reality works, predicting the future. Your symbol doesn't have any capacity to predict the future, so it has no information, it has no meaning. So the idea of you giving me a concept or idea that has no meaning and then demanding I use it, and then if I don't use it, you start accusing me of being a bad person, is absolutely insane. I can't comprehend it at all. It blows my mind. Everyone seems to have gone insane to me. Do you see why I think that? And then being adamant that if people don't use your words and your symbols like if people don't use your words or symbols or agree with the language that you've created or the way that you relate to a specific word, you start trying to damage the reputation and think they're harming people. And it's like, who does that? Like, who just goes around demanding that you believe the way that they believe, and if you don't, then you're a bad person. Like, who wants to hang out with that person? That's insane. It's like, have some humility. You don't get to dominate other people with your ideas. Just like I said before, you can disagree with what I'm saying. You don't have to listen to me. You can watch something else. You can turn this off. You can just refuse to listen. You can disagree with me. You can come up to me and propose why you disagree. You can do whatever you want. You are not obligated to, you don't owe me shit. You don't owe me shit. You owe me nothing. And this is how the marketplace of ideas work. You throw an idea out there. You throw a piece of art. You throw a symbol. You throw a language. You throw a concept. You throw something out there. And you hope that people will find it interesting. They'll listen and they'll want to care. They'll listen. Like, you see? That's how it works. And then if they don't agree with you, then you just be like, oh, okay. And you have to listen to their feedback too. Like, I feel like the feedback I just gave is like sincere, honest feedback from an information theorist. Everything I said is logically true. It's a sound argument. All the premises are true, and the logic is valid. This is information theory. This is the idea of information entropy. This is what it is. This is how it works. This is how it's quantified, and this is the basis of all this telecommunications and computer stuff that we do. It's like the language of all the computer shit that we do. Like, did you guys even know any of this? Who's listening to this? That there's a guy named Claude Shannon that in 1948 he published a mathematical theory of communication, and we call it information theory. How many people are aware of this? And it's just like, this is why you should listen to me. And if you don't, that's fine. I'm not going to accuse you of anything. But, I feel like I have the advantage of having something that I'm pretty sure no one else on the planet could conjure into existence. Only I can say these words, because they're coming directly from the spirit of Shannon. Based off all my prior conditioning, the configuration of my spirit, the configuration of soul. Which direction am I pointing in the space of spirits, in the space of configurations? Anyway, I've talked way too long, way too long. Um, yeah, and there was actually another part to that whole. Actually, I'm not going to present this now because I really want to stop talking. But I do want to tease that I'm going to present a full argument against that professor that at Berkeley. I'm going to put a full argument out as to why her behavior at that thing was unacceptable, and she didn't win anything. She like I, because honestly, at the end of the day, all she's doing is demanding that you agree with her, and if you don't, she's saying you're a bad person. And the construction that she made, like I've already pointed out, doesn't make any sense when you take the characteristics that easily separate man and woman that anyone can verify, so it's very inclusive, and then create it into something in which you take the main characteristics, like men can't get pregnant, as like, you blur them, that creates this world that doesn't have any meaning, and then demanding other people use your meaningless words is just absolutely insane. I'm going to have a discussion about that regarding ethics, and also the fact that her, like, the claim that men can get pregnant, at least in the way that she was using it, is actually an equivocation. It's an objective equivocation. You don't get to disagree. It's an objective equivocation. I want to point that out. So I'm going to quit now. Peace.